And you can see that the one scientist is telling the other scientist, maybe you should be a little more explicit here. It is not a miracle. I'm joking about that, just for those of you who think that I'm being serious, that public speaking only is given to some people as a gift and it cannot be developed. I've had some public speaking experience. I started out my career as an elementary school teacher. That feels like a really long time ago. But of course, as a school teacher, you're talking. And you're talking to, I had a class about 32. I think that there's about 30 or 32 of you in here. So every day, I would be talking. And I decided that I could be more effective as a lawyer, so I went to law school, and there's a lot of public speaking in law school because you got to talk in class. That's the model that they teach with. And then, of course, eventually, arguments at trial. And you really have to be effective if you want to be a good lawyer. You have to be effective at engaging the audience, whether it's just a bench trial where you're in front of one judge, or it's a jury trial and you've got 6 to 12 people, depending on whether it's a civil or criminal trial. Then I moved on to be staff counsel at the state senate. And in that position, you have a lot of different opportunities to speak publicly. You're talking to community members. You're making presentations for the senators. You're making presentations with the senators. And on TVW, you're doing brief presentations of the bills. So you do the introductions when you're staff counsel. So after years, and I've been working since the early 90s, going to the Senate, suddenly I was nervous. I'm on TVW. Now, I know now that there's 4 people watching TVW, but at the time I thought there were hundreds or maybe 1,000. Oh, look, I got a couple of laughs. There was something about being in the light of the camera that just really, I'd break out in a sweat, I'd be so completely nervous, and the senator, the chair of the committee that I was working for, said, you know, when you get that nervous, it looks like we're trying to pull one over on the public. You got to get that under control. So I discovered that there is a science to effective speaking, and as a judicial officer, I preside over a drug court, and we've done a lot of training on your brains and how they interact and respond to things. So I'm going to talk to you about the science of effective speaking today. There are basic things that you can do that can help you, even if you are a practiced public speaker like I am. There are times when you just get nervous and there's really nothing that you can do about that. So what causes stress? Why am I saying there's nothing you can do about that? It is an automatic human response that when you feel like you're under some pressure, your body involuntarily releases adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline increases your heart rate, elevates your blood pressure, boosts your energy supplies. How many of you have gotten a little shaky or broken out in a sweat when you've had to speak publicly? Just by a show of hands. That's your adrenaline. And cortisol is your primary stress hormone. It works with the adrenaline and increases the sugars in your bloodstream. It enhances your brain's use of glucose, and it increases the availability of substances that repair tissues. There's a reason for this, right? Why does your body automatically do that? Anybody have any ideas? Think about the caveman days. You're hunting, it's fight or flight, right? Adrenaline and cortisol happen naturally to help increase your surviving ability. How many of you hunt for a living now? So things have changed, but our body's responses have not changed, so we need to learn how to deal with these issues. But adrenaline and cortisol, that's what causes that nervous reaction. It happens to everybody, whether it looks like it's happening or not. And there's not really anything to stop this process. But you can manage it. Go ahead. Foods and behaviors. Just go one at a time. Let's talk about sugar for a second. Anybody not know what sugar is? Now, in the previous slide, I talked about how cortisol increases the sugar production in your system. your body can break down the fat in your body and turn it into sugar and use it for energy. So if you have a sugary breakfast the morning of a speech, what have you done? Overdosed your sugar. You're overloading your body. Your body's already going to be producing extra sugar because you're feeling stress. So don't add any sugar. Make sure that you're having a balanced meal before your any speech. If it's in the morning, avoid the sugary breakfast. If it's in the evening, have something that's a little more balanced. Reduce your sugar intake when you're going to be speaking publicly. It reduces the stress response. Caffeine. Today's coffee day. How many of you knew that? In the Pacific Northwest, we consume a lot of coffee. We are the home of Starbucks. We believe in our coffee, right? And lawyers in particular, we'll set up an IV drip, right? Just put it right into the bloodstream. We don't need to be drinking it. We want it straight into our systems. Caffeine actually also increases adrenaline and that cortisol response. So you want to watch your caffeine intake. Inadequate sleep also increases stress. So how many of you got a good night's sleep last night? We as a community actually do a really bad job of sleeping. We're sleep deprived. We need to make sure that we're getting adequate sleep. Now, are these things that anybody can do? Are these difficult to do? It's really not difficult to manage these behaviors. We can reduce our sugar intake, we can reduce our caffeine intake, and we can get a good night's sleep before we speak publicly. Go ahead. So a little more science. Tryptophan is a hormone that can reduce stress. It helps regulate your appetite, it helps you sleep better, and it improves your mood. There are food sources of tryptophan. How many of you have felt really sleepy after a big turkey dinner on Thanksgiving? That's the tryptophan. So we don't want to overload it, because when you're speaking publicly, you definitely don't want to get to the point where you're actually sleeping through your presentation. That wouldn't work. So tuna, shellfish, turkey, some reports say even red meat has some tryptophan. Dairy products, nuts, seeds, soybeans, bananas. Have any of you ever heard this before? You've heard of the turkey making you sleepy. Well, there you go. Tryptophan actually counteracts the adrenaline and the cortisol, so it has a beneficial impact on your stress, and it helps you manage it. So I'm going to have, you want to go back up to it? Go ahead. Yeah. So I'm going to take just a second. I want to make sure that what I am saying to you makes sense to you, and that I am covering the things that you want to hear from me today. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to leave that slide up instead of the question slide. And I'm going to walk around the room and invite you to ask me some questions about what you've heard so far, or anything that you want to know about my experience public speaking and things that I do. No questions at all? One over there.
Out of curiosity, how much notice did you have that you were going to speak here today, and how much preparation did it take you to put together?
Excellent question. So I have been, let's see, it took us a month to nail down a date. We started a month ago talking about a date that would work for both of us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, hey, Indu.
Yes.
I'm gonna put this on YouTube. Could you repeat the question, because I couldn't hear Dan. Since he's not mic'd up, so that would help if you could repeat.
Okay. Dan asked how much notice I had in preparing for this, and also how much time I put into preparing for this. So Jeff and I coordinated about a month ago to pick a date that worked for both of us. As you heard in my introduction, I'm the Superior Court Commissioner. That means typically from 8 to 5, I'm at the courthouse. And I have something else going on. So I had to rearrange my calendars to make this work today. And it's, you got to pick a date when you don't have a whole lot going on your calendars to start them late. So setting it up, the notice, I had a month's notice. Let's see. How much prep did I put into it? I would say, and that's a difficult question to answer because as a judicial officer doing drug courts and truancy matters, that a lot of this brain science is part of what I'm getting in trainings over time. So some of it is information that I have from other sources that I just put up there. So I mean, it would be reasonable to say that I've been prepping for this presentation since I worked at the Senate, because I started getting information on how to be an effective speaker, how to reduce the stress impact 7 years ago when I wanted to get this information for myself. But in terms of actual, how long did it take me to sit down and put this PowerPoint together and think about where I was going to go with all of you? It took me an hour. I believe in using PowerPoints for 2 reasons. One, when you get up in front of a group of new people that you don't know, there's a natural nervous response because people are looking at you. And PowerPoint gives them another point to focus on. The other reason, the not so selfish reason, is that people learn differently. Can you tell me the 3 different types of learning styles? Do any of you know? Visual is one of them, and that's what PowerPoint is for the visual learners. Auditory is the other, and that's what the talking is for the auditory learners. And then does anybody know what the third is? What's that? No? Doing. It's auditory, visual, and what is sometimes called haptic or kinesthetic learners, people who learn by doing. So I am not going to be able to facilitate your learning by doing today, but I know that you're going to have that opportunity in this class. But I am able to design a presentation that meets the needs of those who learn by hearing, as I'm talking to you, and those who learn by seeing, as I'm putting some points up on the PowerPoint. So I took the time to do a PowerPoint because it meets your needs. And I would encourage you to do something like that. And you can't always use PowerPoint. I had to check in and make sure that there was a technology available. But you can always do some sort of visuals. You can use some demonstratives no matter what you're doing. And I will usually incorporate something visual just for the visual learners. I'm a visual learner. And our society is actually geared towards people who learn by hearing. Almost everything is geared towards auditory learners, and that's unfortunate. You'll see that I pace a little. I like to walk around. I like to get back into the back of the classroom. I guess that's from my elementary school days where all the bad actors were in the back of the classroom and they wouldn't talk or ask questions. But if I brought myself back there, then they felt more comfortable about actually getting engaged and asking questions. And so one thing that I did do to prepare for this that might surprise you is I practiced with my husband. How many of you does that surprise? Why does that surprise you?
Because you do it so often. I didn't really think, because it's at your nature now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's a fair statement, but actually, even though I do it so often and public speaking is my bread and butter, I don't talk to groups of youth. I didn't practice when I was invited to go to another college to talk about women in the law, because that is something that I do every day. I don't actually think about every day what makes me a good public speaker. I don't think about why am I effective. So I had to think about it. I had to think about how this was flowing, and my husband gave me some good advice about, move that. Don't do that one there. Move it later. Make sure that you're giving them a full 15 seconds to read the slide, or they're not going to get the miracle joke. So little things like that Practicing is really good because you don't know how things are going to go over until you have a human being on the other side.
Is it actually harder for you to do that in front of your husband because he can be so critical?
Well, maybe I'm unusual, but I love constructive criticism. I like being able to improve something. So it may have been fine before I practiced it with him. I think it's better now. If I do it again, because I've done it with you this time, if I'm invited to do it to another group, it'll be better. That's just the nature of public speaking. So no, and my first 6 trials, I practiced my closing argument with my husband. I stopped, around half a dozen. I got to the point where, okay, I don't have to practice my closing argument with my husband. It's time consuming for him. Closing argument's about 20 minutes. And our kid was getting older and, life kind of gets in the way of doing that all the time. I still practice in front of the mirror. It's important to practice. It's important to make sure that you're using hand gestures, you're engaging people, you're smiling. It's important to incorporate all of those things into your presentation because you want to connect with your audience. I don't know all of you. I can't take the time to get to know each one of you, but I can make eye contact and I can smile and I can make sure that I get closer to those of you that are in the back on occasion so that you feel more comfortable asking me questions. Yes?
It seems like in a job like yours, you can really mess up badly if you're not politically correct. Do they give you any type of training to make sure that you don't get up there and say something politically incorrect or get yourself in trouble? One of the things we study is communication is permanent. I mean, once it's out there, you can't take it back.
And is the mic picking you up? Do I need to repeat your questions as well? Okay. So Jeff asked, is there a particular training that helps me to be more politically correct? Because in a job like mine, I could say something that could be harmful to my career, to my immediate position, or to advancement in the future. And as a judicial officer, there's ongoing training every year. There's a judicial conference, and they talk about ethics. And ethics is really about not putting your foot in your mouth when you're a judge, just making sure that there's a lot of rules, actually, in being a judge. And there are things that you can and cannot say. I cannot tell you what my political leanings are, because that's against the rules as a judge. I can't talk about my thinking in terms of a particular case and why I'm going a certain direction, because it's not appropriate. It would be inappropriate to the people that appeared before me for me to be talking about their cases like that. So there are rules and there are layers of rules and there are lots of ways to make mistakes. So every year we have a judicial conference, and ethics is one of those things, and we cover a variety of different things before, or it's not always before, because always in January there's something called Judicial College, where you spend a week with other baby judges. That's what they call us when we're in our first year. And we focus on those kinds of things. But a lot of it, you're just on your own. I do, say yesterday, I sentenced 7 kids. Some just for a few days, some for years. And you have to say something to each one of them. You design your comments to try to motivate them to change their behaviors, to not be engaged in criminal activity, to spend their time investing in themselves like you are in school and furthering their future. And sometimes it's hard because you're speaking extemporaneously. There is no, does anybody know what that word means, extemporaneous? Off the cuff, without any preparation. So as a judicial officer, you're always speaking extemporaneously, actually. You don't have a whole lot of time. You don't know who's going to plead, and you can't prepare a little motivating speech for all 30 kids that you're going to see that morning, because that's not a good use of time. You don't know which of the 30 that you're going to see are going to plead or if they're going to plead. And on an average Wednesday, you get 5 to 8 pleas. So you think right then and there, what are you going to say to this kid to motivate them not to be in your courtroom in the future? It's hard. It is, it doesn't get easier because, especially if you care about people and you really want to say something that connects with them, you're always going to be working on getting just the right thing to say. Eye contact is important. And the rules, we get all of that training. The rules are just, they become part of the back of your brain. It's the soundtrack. I call it the front page test. Everything I say, I want to make sure that I don't have a problem reading it on the front page of the paper the next day. So I live by that motto. If what I'm going to say right now, and I've got 3 minutes to figure it out while everybody else is talking and it's getting to be my turn, if I wouldn't want to read it on the front page, I'm not going to say it. So I think that's a good rule to apply. I actually applied it as a teacher. What I'm about to say to my student right now, what I want to read about it on the front page tomorrow, I applied it as a lawyer. I applied it when I was, I guess, still a lawyer, but staff counsel with the Senate, even more so because it becomes, everything's kind of under a microscope when you're there. And if I thought I was under a microscope as staff counsel, you would not believe the power of being on the bench where someone's always looking at you, someone's always trying to figure out what you're going to say. That you're under a microscope. So.
Do you get a lot of, do you ever get in the situation where you've sentenced a kid and the parents have some real negative things to say to you, or are you insulated from that?
The question was, do I get situations where I've sentenced a kid and the parents have negative things to say to me? And the answer is, let's see, how many of you think yes? And how many of you think no? We have an open court system. People can come in, parents are there, family members are there. I have had people say very positive things, even when I'm sentencing kids to 3 years, about the choices that I made in terms of what I was saying to the kids. And I say kids, but we're talking 12 to 18-year-olds, so young adults. I have had people be belligerent in the courtroom. You're not isolated from that in the sense that whatever they're going to say right then, there is a piece of being isolated from it because most people don't say it to my face. They're going to say it behind my back. I recognize that, and that's fine. It's not about me. It's not personal. It's professional. And I've learned over time, it was harder 5 years ago when I started. I've learned over time to just... that's my mantra, right? It's professional, not personal. It's not about me. It's about my job. It's about what I had to do. So it's easier to let it go. It was harder to let it go in the past. But I do have a duty to control my courtroom, so if someone is using profanity in the courtroom, I have to control that. I stop them. Yes?
It kind of goes along with that, but in your position, how is it, what are effective ways that you've found to not bring work home with you? Like when you're at home, you want to be a mom, you want to be a wife, or how do you separate work from personal?
So Matthew's question was, how do you separate work from personal? How do you keep from bringing work home? It took me a long time to learn that. When I was doing the child welfare work, I would bring the work home all the time, and I never actually got a break. So it causes burnout, as you're always thinking about these horrible situations of abuse and neglect if you're bringing it all home. So I learned over time that it's better to leave the work at the office physically. So even when I had to work overtime, I would go back to the office and do it there. Because at a certain point, I discovered that I wasn't doing anything well. I was a mom and a mother, but my attention was so split between the work at home and the work that I brought home that I wasn't doing any of it well. So I've learned that it's better come home, put the kid to bed, do the 12 o'clock to 4 a.m. shift if you really needed to put in the overtime, back at the office or go in the morning at 5 in the morning and have the husband take over the kid duties in the morning, than to actually bring the files home. So the first step was to not bring the files home. It's easier now as a judge because you really can't bring the files home. It's not appropriate. We've moved to electronic review, so everything's electronic. I suppose I could get access so that I'm reviewing files electronically at home, but now it's a habit. I've established that work is at work and home is at home, and so I'll stay at the office, or I'll manage in such a way that, I'll be able to get to my kid's basketball game and be fully present. I was that person that sat there with the files at the basketball games in the stands trying to do both. It doesn't work. So I just don't do that. And I gave my BlackBerry back. I turned it in because it's addictive. And you start to get this overdeveloped sense of your own importance when somebody's asking you questions all the time and you're able to respond. And you get this sense of, it's really important. I have to give them my opinion. No, you don't. It can wait until the next day. So really good boundaries. It's important to have them. It's over time, it develops.
Indu, one of the things that these guys write about is hidden gems in the talks. For example, you just said something that made my ears perk up. You said 5 o'clock in the morning. And I know that a lot of successful people get up really early. Are you one of those people? Or if not, what other hidden gems can you give them about being organized, your path to success?
Hidden gems and what are some tips on my path to success? So I talk about the 5 o'clock in the morning because that's my trick. That's how I manage. I want to be able to leave the office by 5 in the evening, pick up my kid from track practice or cross-country practice or basketball or when he was littler, just to spend some time with him. We get quality time if I'm just focused. And the most important job I do is raise that little man. That's just the most important thing that I do. So if I don't spend time with him, then I'm missing out on an opportunity. I have a very, very small window of time to affect him and his personality, so I'm going to make sure that I get some quality time with him every day. So to make that happen, yes, I'm getting up at 5 in the morning. I like to take care of myself. I believe that it's important to work out, to eat well. All of those things actually help. There was a time when I was really actively involved in litigation when I wasn't taking care of myself physically. I gained weight. I didn't have as much energy. I was slower in everything that I did. And that just makes you less effective in the long run. You're working more, but you're not getting as much done. Now I get up at 5 in the morning, I work out, I get on with my day, and I'm able to leave the office at 5 o'clock when everybody else does, and that works really well. I will tell you honestly, I don't have to work as much when I'm a juvenile court commissioner as when I am a family law commissioner. There's a lot more reading when you're doing the motion calendars. You're doing all that math to figure out how to distribute people's property and incomes. So I don't spend as much time at the office, but I still get up in the morning and walk with friends or do other things so that I keep that habit. So I'm healthier when I'm the juvenile court commissioner because I get more workouts in. When I'm the family law commissioner, I get more reading in. So it's a balance, and it's a 2-year rotation, so we go up and down, but it works out.
Time for one more.
One more question.
Do you have any difficulty getting released for this particular speaking assignment, given that it's not 100% connected with law?
It isn't connected with law, but when you talk about getting released, that I work at the pleasure of the Board of Judges. Commissioners are appointed and not elected. There are 8 elected judges in Thurston County and 2 2/10 commissioners, and we do the work that they assigned to us. But then I'm pretty independent. As long as I'm getting the work done, then they're happy with that. And I don't do things like this really often. When I do, it's usually in the evenings. I don't do things like this during core office hours. So no, it wasn't difficult because they support that. So let's run through a couple more slides. So the gem that I have for you is to make sure you enhance your calm. We talked about these things, and I'm just going to highlight them one more time. When you are going to do a presentation, a public speech, make sure that you affect your food and your behaviors. Eat a turkey sandwich, have a banana, grab a handful of nuts. When you're in a presentation, obviously, you can't be throwing a handful of nuts in your mouth. So drink some water. Remember to regulate your breathing. Believe it or not, people forget to breathe. And the breathing enhances your calm. So you want to do the things that enhance your calm. I brought the water with me just in case. And we talked a little bit about the brain, and I love the brain science, so I thought I'd throw it up there for you. This part of your brain is your emotional center. And when you get there, you want to pull yourself out and get back into the hippocampus, which is the thinking part of your brain. So you need to literally do something physical like the deep breathing or the water. When I talk in public, and I don't know if any of you caught it, but when I start talking about my son, I get just a little emotional. I started breathing deeper. Is you want to get out of that emotional part of your brain and back into the thinking part of your brain before you start crying in public. So it really does work. It is a science. It's not a miracle. It's not a mystery. And that's the key that I want to leave with all of you is there are things that you can do. Every one of you can be an effective public speaker. There are some simple tricks that you can apply in order to improve your ability. And last slide. Practice. It's important. It's critical. I've been, if you count my teaching years, in the public eye for 21 years, and I still practice. And I cannot emphasize how important it is to practice. And finally, be prepared. If you're able to find out who your audience is, what they consist of, what they're going to want from you, organize your presentation, and what was that last point? Know your topic so you're prepared for questions. Now, a lot of your questions were about me. That topic I know. But I am actually prepared for questions on the brain science of it as well, because I didn't know what direction you would be going. As you could tell by my last slides, I figured you'd be talking more about the brain part of it, but no. So do you have any final questions? I think, how much more time do we have? Just a few minutes if you have any final questions about talking. And all of these skills that I'm talking about, I'm talking about talking to larger groups of people because that's what I do. But the most important public speaking that you're going to be doing in the near future is interviews. And all of these things can be applied to that area as well. Any other questions?
Let's get into a big thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have a question?
What do they do to your rotations on what kind of hearings?
Say that again?
Why do they do 2-meter rotations on what kind of cases?
Why do they do 2-year rotations? They didn't used to. There were 2 commissioners in this position for 14 years that each one had the other side of the position. When new people came in, they decided that a rotation would make sense. 2 years allows you to settle into the position and stay on top of the law. And it's not so long that you get burned out. When you're doing divorce cases, it's a lot of time. You're working way more than 40 hours, and it really wears out that person. So the idea is that you'll be able to keep people in the position longer, and that's a benefit to the community when you have well-trained people in the position longer. There was one more question there.
I was just going to ask if you had to do an interview and how it went.
If I have had to do an interview, I have had to do many interviews. For the teaching position, I had at least 9 interviews before I landed my first job. Some of those were panel interviews, some of those were one-on-one with principals. I had to do interviews I have professional ADHD. I don't necessarily stay in a position for very long, so every 4 years I've switched positions. So I have had interviews, one-on-one and panel interviews, at least a dozen in the 21 years that I've been working. And practice makes perfect. It's really, it's a good opportunity. Even if you don't ultimately get the job, every interview that you do builds those skill sets for the next interview and makes you better at it the next time around.
You ever had a person that you put into jail, per se, come back to you and say thank you for your decisions before?
The question was, have I ever had a person that I incarcerated come back and thank me? I actually have. You never know how people are going to respond to you, and I've had people come up to me in public. I've more often than the kids, it's the parents that will see me at the grocery store or something and come up to me and say, that really what you said had an impact on them, and that really motivates me to keep thinking about what I say to young people. I have participated in groups where we've had panels of kids come back and tell what was most effective, and when they see that I'm in the room, they've thanked me. That's really powerful.
Also, does that scare you, knowing that these people can find you at the grocery store?
Does it scare me? It did. In the beginning, I was scared. This is the age of information. People could find me not just at the grocery store, but they could find me at home. I've had some threats. It kind of goes with the nature of the job, and it is scary. But what I have learned over the years, what I've discovered is, particularly at the grocery store, when someone has a positive reaction to you and is coming up to you, that's not the person to be afraid of. The person to be afraid of is the one that does when they recognize you. And I am a tall Indian woman. I'm recognizable. It's a rare combination, and it's just people recognize me, and I've just accepted that.